Well, hi again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 100 Yards of Football. Today is our Legend Show, and we're going to begin with one of those guys that you know about. He's been around. He has played well in the college level, obviously in the National Football League, and now as an executive, you might wonder who we're going to talk about. We'll find out in just a second. Jeremiah Long is our producer and engineer. Thank you, Jeremiah, for all that you do to make our stats and graphics up to date and up to speed. We thank you for that. Our co-host and our founder is Vincent Turner. And Vincent, today we're going to talk about a guy that has produced on the field and off, collegiately and professionally. He's done a magnificent job. He's in the Hall of Fame, or at least the Ring of Honor at Stanford, but also in the National Football League Hall of Fame as a player, and now as executive. We're talking about John Lynch.
One of the most talented football players in GMs. And guys who's done something outside the game and went to a prestigious college in Stanford University. John Lynch, what more can you say today? I'm very excited to talk about this young man because he's a class act. And everything he touches turns to gold. Back to you, Hawk.
Including being a 49er and the gold rush there with them. Well, John Terrence Lynch was born on September 25th, 1971. He is a junior. His father, John Terrence Sr., played for the Steelers. So he's a multi-generational guy. He was born in Hinesville, Illinois, but early in his life, they moved to the San Diego area. The family did. And so he's been a Californian ever since he can remember. When he was 10 years old, his father took him to his first football game, his first pro game. And the Chargers were playing, and his dad was commented as saying, John sat in that chair. It was blazing hot. The sun was beating down on him. He was getting sunburned, but he didn't move. He just watched the guys. He watched what they did. He watched how they moved. And he could tell as a 10-year-old that this young man had something special, something different. He was a great athlete, don't get me wrong, but he studied, he watched, he observed in ways that maybe started planting seeds in his head to maybe someday I could do this as well, either in the National Football League or Major League Baseball. He gets to high school, Vincent, great athlete there, played football, basketball, baseball, did well enough his junior year to where he got noticed. People started recruiting him. But his senior year, he gets hurt playing football. And he breaks an ankle, and he's not able to finish. But he played well enough to be recruited to a couple of different spots. We'll talk about that in a second. But he was also an excellent baseball player. He was drafted by the Florida Marlins in the second round. I think he was the 68th player taken overall. So he could pitch, he could play quarterback. He was a guy that was a multi-purpose athlete, could do all kinds of things. He was a point guard on the basketball court. But Torrey Pines High School is certainly glad to have had John Lynch on the roster on their football, basketball, and baseball teams.
You think about his high school, and I was doing my research last night. Some very talented guys that didn't even play football just came through that high school. Tony Hawk, heard of him? Shaun White, the snowboarder.
Skateboard, snowboards, yeah. There's no snow in San Diego last time I checked, but getting on a skateboard and rolling around in some of those swimming pools and in the public parks, that's where you learn.
And then I'm going to throw this at you. Chad Hutchinson, who I thought was one of the best talented quarterbacks coming into the National Football League, had a brief stint with the Dallas Cowboys. So it tells me Mr. Lynch had a lot to live up to, and it was a highly, highly academic school. But you brought up one point, Harp. The guy was a hell of a baseball player. And really, if it wouldn't been for his best friend going to Stanford the year before and his relationship with Dennis Green convincing him to come to Stanford, John Lynch probably would have played pro baseball. Back to you, Hawk.
Yeah, he was recruited heavily for both sports, but the football aspect of it is what we'll focus on today, even though we're not disregarding anything that he was able to accomplish as a baseball player. Again, being the first one, his jersey from the league that he was playing, and I think it was the New York, Pennsylvania League, where he threw the first pitch as a Miami Marlin. That jersey is in Cooperstown. It's in New York. It's in the Hall of Fame there. So John Lynch is in two Hall of Fames, actually, if you want to take a look at it from that perspective. He goes to Washington State on a recruiting trip. Remember, I told you he broke his ankle during his senior season. I believe it was in his first game. So to be recruited without even being able to be seen and having an injury like that certainly is an accomplishment in and of itself. But Dennis Erickson was the coach there, and he makes a verbal commitment to Washington State while he's there in Pullman. He calls his dad and he says, "Dad, I love it here. I want to go to Washington State. They're an up-and-coming program, and this is what I want to do." Now, the rumor has it that his father got off the phone, jumped on the very first plane, gets to Pullman, and drives to Erickson's house, and John is there. Now, John tells the story that it's not even our house, and my dad says, "Hey, Coach, we need to go in a side room and have a conversation." And his dad says, "I am not going to let my son commit to you until after he takes a visit to Stanford." Now, there was an upcoming visit a week or two later, but he wanted to pull his son away from the commitment, and he goes to Stanford. He meets up with Dennis Green, as you mentioned, develops a relationship with him, and Dennis Green recruits him to be a part of the Stanford quarterback club, if you will. Some of the great quarterbacks that have played there, like Jim Plunkett, Turk Schronert, a guy named John Elway, several others that were a part of the Cardinal quarterback tradition. And John wanted to be a part of that, plus the academics. So Vincent, he plays there as a quarterback his first and second year, freshman and sophomore, doesn't see the field much. Throws for about 45 yards his freshman year, has one interception, has about 150 yards in the second year, but he's not going to play. And things started to change just before his junior year. He visits with coach. He talks to him a little bit about switching over. He does. He goes to safety, and that to me was a difference maker for him. He realized, I'm not going to be able to play quarterback, at least not at this level, but I want to be on the field. I want to be competitive, and I want to help this team win. He switches over to safety, and they end up going to a bowl game. They lose. We'll talk about that in just a second. But Vincent, first, catch up on some of the things. I've thrown a lot at our folks, but there's several things here that we can dive a little bit deeper into.
Well, one thing for sure, it was a sophomore year. He got beaten out at the quarterback position. He thought he should have been starting, but then he really seriously contemplating about transferring. And that's when he had, I think, a meeting of the minds, as you just said. Hey, I'm going to be battling for this quarterback position. He went to the position coach over there at Stanford and he said, hey, I want to move to safety. And Dennis Green, what's so funny about it, Dennis Green tried to tell him, please be patient, John. You're going to get your shot. And next season, you'll have 2 years left to be the starting quarterback here. Well, John Lynch wanted to get on the field. And he went to safety, and the rest is history. Back to you, Harp.
Yep, it certainly was. And he didn't get to play enough his junior year. And Dennis Green ends up leaving and going to the Minnesota Vikings. And Bill Walsh takes over. And Bill Walsh, going into his senior year, has a one-on-one with all the players. But his meeting with John, and he says, son, I think you could be an all-pro in the National Football League. I like the way you play. I like your grit and determination. And I think you should be as good as Ronnie Lott. Well, Ronnie ends up coming to a practice a few weeks later, and he and Joe Montana, the rumor has it that John says they were sitting on the hood of one of the players' Mercedes-Benz, whoever drove there. How imagine that, seeing Joe Montana and Ronnie Lott at one of your practices. And he eventually gets to meet Ronnie and talk to him a little bit. But what an influence that was. And he ends up getting a chance to play. And what a difference, especially in that Notre Dame game. They lost their first game that year against Texas A&M. They win the next three. They go to South Bend, and Vincent, tell our listeners about that big game. That was a difference maker for John Lynch.
It was a sunny afternoon, touchdown Jesus. And I had never really heard of John Lynch. And that game right there, Stanford came in ranked 18th. I think Notre Dame came in ranked 4th. And that afternoon, all I can see is number 47. It's a play in that football game when he hit Jerome Bettis straight up and caused a fumble. And I believe it was Chris Collinsworth working, I believe, the co-analysis on that game. He went crazy. Then John Lynch came back with a critical interception in that football game. Then he had 9 tackles. I didn't know after that game. I said, that young man's going to go high in the next draft. I knew it. But what really stuck out to me about John Lynch play that evening is that who he went against, Rick Meyer, who's the second quarterback taken in the 93 draft. And of course, they hit on Jerome Bettis. And then his coverage ability, he had another knockout blow against Lake Dawson, who was an All-American wide receiver for Notre Dame. But he was all over the field. And Chris Collinsworth, I'm going to bring his name up again. He said, this young man, John Lynch, don't be surprised. He's going to be in the Pro Bowl several times in his career. Back to you, Harp.
Yeah, his Stanford career, they end up going to the Aloha Bowl and lose to Georgia Tech, 18-17. That was his junior year. And then his senior year, they just caught fire. They beat the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. They lose the last couple of games, but they have one of the best games, or best seasons, really. 10-2 was their final. They had a good year, and they end up going to the Blockbuster Bowl, and they win against Penn State. And he still has a decision to make, John does. He pitches in a summer league. He goes 3-0 for the Marlins, and his ERA was about 3.0. So he played well, but he had a decision to make. And he remembered what Coach Bill Walsh had said, and he tells his father, he says, we need to talk to the Marlins, and we need to postpone this because I think I have a chance to go to the National Football League. He gets drafted in the 3rd round to Tampa Bay. And there was a little bit of a similarity that John had. And Tampa wasn't a very good team at that time. First year there, they go 5. They win 5 games. They win 6 his second year. He struggled to start. He was playing special teams, but really not getting on the field a whole heck of a lot. Sam Weich was the head coach. And Sam Weich, if we look back at our history, and Bill Walsh were both in Cincinnati under Paul Brown. And Paul said, Sam, you're going to be the guy who's going to replace me in Cincinnati. Interesting story. And Bill Walsh, who was there as offensive coordinator, leaves, and he goes to Stanford. This is back in the late 70s. So even though they knew each other, there wasn't a whole lot of friendship, if you will, between Sam Weich and Bill Walsh. And John gets to play for both of them, one in college and then one in the pros. A couple years into it, they fire Sam Weich, they bring in Tony Dungy, and things started to take a completely different face for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Even though that first year they only win another 5 games, playoffs and Super Bowls were soon in the horizon. They brought in some different players, along with John Lynch. You've got Warren Sapp, Derek Brooks, Hardy Nickerson, Mike Allstat, Warwick Dunn, one after another. And next thing you know, they're playing for a Super Bowl. So Tampa Bay started turning it around, especially when Tony Dungy comes in and they turn that Tampa 2 defense. And he plays a lot of in the box as the 8th man in terms of a defensive strategy. And John's career takes off and he starts getting paid. He gets a new contract, a 4-year deal for $6.8 million. John Lynch was somebody to be reckoned with.
Also, you tend to forget one guy that played a very heavy part in this and going to the cover 2 scheme. That's when John Lynch really exploded on the scene as a safety with the Buccaneers. Lane Kiffin's daddy, Monty, was behind that cover 2. And when he put that in, John Lynch just, exploded. And I remember number 47 making a lot of tackles at the line of scrimmage. But when you want to talk about a box safety, John Lynch played it at a high level. Back to you, Harp.
Yeah, they go to that Super Bowl game, and yes, Monty Kiffin was a tremendous difference maker for the Tony Dungy staff that they had there. And Tony gets fired because they go to the playoffs, they don't advance. They had lost to St. Louis, they had lost to Philadelphia.
Right.
Yep. They had a couple of rivalry games against Green Bay Packers. Remember, those were the days when they were still in the same division. But they finally get to the Super Bowl, and they play against the Raiders. And the way I understand it is John is watching film, and he's looking at Rich Gannon, and he's looking at his tendencies. And he realizes that the coaching staff in Oakland had not changed a lot of their audible calls from when John Gruden was there. So they would be calling a play out, and John Lynch had a microphone. He was mic'd up. And he knew just from the way that the offense was talking for the Raiders that a sluggo seam was coming, for example. Sluggo seam is what John says. And he knew the play before it even happened. Once they break the huddle, he was able to determine a few things, even though the AFC appreciated the Raiders and obviously watched them roll through the conference and get to the Super Bowl. Gruden knew something different, and he and Lynch talked about this later on, that we had a real good idea of what they were doing. And it will come to pass that Rich Gannon, as good as he was, threw 5 interceptions in that Super Bowl, breaking a record. So Tampa knew before it was going to happen what they did offensively, and the Raiders were defeated soundly because of it. So congratulations to John for that. Had a great career with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They end up releasing him, letting him go, and he and John Elway from the Stanford days end up having a couple of conversations. Next thing you know, Pat Bowlen brings him in and signs him to a deal, and the Pro Bowl and his success gets to continue outside of Tampa, and he had a great career while he was playing in those 4 years with the Denver Broncos.
I think when you look overall his career, like I said, everything he touches is gold. He had a very successful career with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, won a Super Bowl, then he gets to Denver, had some very productive seasons. And when you talk about a football player, if you want to mirror your career, I would say I would like to have a John Lynch career. It's nothing flawless in his resume. Back to you, Harp.
2-time Super Bowl champion. He was an All-Pro 2 times as a first-teamer, second-teamer another 2 times. He ended up going to the Pro Bowl 9 times in his career. He won the Bart Starr Award in 2007. He was in the Ring of Honor in Tampa as well as in Denver. He was a third-team All-American as a Stanford graduate there. First-team All Pac-10 back in those days. You'll have to forgive me. And in 2019, he ends up winning the Pro Football Writers Association Executive of the Year. Let's talk a little bit about once his football career was over, and by the way, he's a Hall of Famer, he ends up going to Fox. He's a studio analyst, and he ends up being a guy that is the color analyst during some games. Next thing you know, he gets a call from the 49ers, and he becomes their general manager. He and Kyle Shanahan have a tremendous relationship with one another. John put it this way. He had a class when he was in Stanford where you had to, on paper, you had to write an analysis of how you're going to make decisions if you were to run the company. And he started doing things like that while he was with the 49ers. And he and Kyle Shanahan had a drafted document that they put together about this is going to be our goal for the draft. This is going to be how we're going to assemble our team. And we're going to do it either through free agency, but mostly through the draft. So there's a lot of different ways that he took some of that insight knowledge and just the smarts that he was able to gain as a student athlete and turn it into a winning program there for the 49ers.
Well, look what the 49ers have done. 2 Super Bowl appearances under him. The players they have drafted, Deebo Samuel, Nick Bosa, Brock Purdy. You have to have some knowledge to draft a guy the end of the 7th round, actually last pick of the draft. Now he's one of the top quarterbacks in the league. What more can you say? Obviously, John Lynch is one of the smartest GMs in the league. And if people thinking the 49ers are going to drop off a little bit, I will hold up on that. Because as long as you got Mr. Lynch running that organization, I think the 49ers are going to still be competitive in the NFC West. And that's what's really surprised me, not his playing on the field, but his ability to go into San Francisco with all that pressure from the history of winning, I believe 4 Super Bowls, correct? And still maintain that level of organization on the field at a high level. The flowers and the hats go off to you, Mr. John Lynch. Back to you, Harper.
Yeah, absolutely. He's been able to be productive. Football is his life, and he certainly made the right choice when it came to playing baseball or football. But that decision has led to countless and numerous wins, and the organization that he's either played for or has managed for has certainly been better because John Lynch has been a part of it. He married Linda Allred, whose brother, John, played at USC, and I was a teammate with them when I was in Chicago. He was a backup tight end with the Bears for a brief moment or two while he was a part of the National Football League. His son, John's son, Jake, ends up going to Stanford between 2018 and 2021. So right there in the pandemic, I think he earned an extra year of eligibility because of that. But sports and football is a part of the Lynch family with his father, himself, and even his son has been something that has been worthwhile. But John Lynch is a tremendous individual, obviously worthy of the National Football League Hall of Fame honors and everything that he was able to do to college. And obviously since then, he puts his name on it. And as you said, Vincent, it turns gold. Final thoughts here about John Lynch.
Outstanding player. I'm going to tell a true story. In my whole lifetime, I only wanted to go to one Super Bowl in my life, and I was able, through the blessings of the Lord Jesus Christ, I attended that Super Bowl in San Diego when Tampa Bay defeated the Oakland Raiders 48-21. And you go back and look at John Lynch's career, and I always say your career is mirrored by the people that surround you. Think about him being in Tampa. Warren Sapp, Hall of Famer. Rondé Barber, Hall of Famer. Derrick Brooks, Hall of Famer. Then you think about all the great safeties that's played in the National Football League. Donnie Shell. We just did Larry Wilson. Ed Reed, Brian Dawkins, Sean Taylor, Kenny Easley. But one thing, when you're a great football player and you're a great safety and you mentioning all these great people, that means you great. Greatness for John Lynch. And he's continuing to have success. And I don't see it slowing down as him being the GM with the 49ers. He's done it on the field. He's done it in the office. What more can you ask? One day he might be an owner. Who knows? But John Lynch is a tremendous individual that we're talking about today here on 100 Yards of Football. Back to you, Mr. Harper LaBelle.
Well, when Dave Baker, who was in charge of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, said, for all you've done for the game and for all that you will do for the game, the Pro Football Hall of Fame thanks you. And I think they can certainly say that about John Lynch. He's a Pro Football Hall of Famer as a player, as an executive. Obviously, he has won the Executive of the Year award as general manager with the San Francisco 49ers. He was an All-American and at Stanford during his college career. And then obviously in high school, he encompassed the ability to be able to go on to the next level and play in college. So he has encompassed football in a way that very few have. So John Terrence Lynch, we honor him today here on 100 Yards of Football during our legend show. And we thank him tremendously for all he's done for the game. So for Jeremiah Long, our producer and engineer, for our co-founder and our co-host, Vincent Turner, I'm Harper LaBelle saying thank you for tuning in, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day.